What if I told you benefit fraud crackdowns have got nothing to do with cracking down on fraud? I'm Rachel, I'm a public and social policy consultant, and I want what I know to be what you know. So I'm recording this ahead of the budget tomorrow in the UK, and we're likely to see two. One is that the two-child limit will be lifted, and two, that there will be a further crackdown on benefit fraud. These two policies side by side look unrelated other than the fact that they're both to do with benefits. Both policies, both statements, both sort of declarations, they're not fiscal economic policies, they're political ideologies and narratives that we're being fed constantly and that are framing our attitudes towards poverty and people who need to rely on the welfare state because of massive wealth inequality and structural factors that people just simply cannot escape. And I don't think it's any coincidence that now the two-child limit has become so politically toxic that the government have realised that they can't get away with it anymore. They can no longer afford to spend the political capital on the two-child limit, that they're reinforcing a crackdown on benefit fraud as a way of saying, listen, fair enough, we're not going to do this anymore, but don't you forget that you are being cheated. No, I'm not saying benefit fraud is okay. Obviously, it's not. And any attempt to defraud the public purse ought to be dealt with. But benefit fraud is a fraction, a tiny amount of what we spend in welfare, but it has a disproportionate amount of attention paid to it. Not because it's a problem. No system is 100% proof. There will always be an element of fraud. It is not possible to eradicate fraud. But the amount of attention and the amount of political narrative that it gets is massively disproportionate to the size of the problem. So let's look at the figures. The welfare budget in the UK, the last year for which figures are available, was £292 billion. Fraud was 2.2% of that. It's about 6.5 billion, still a lot of money, I completely agree. But it's 2.2%. Now, further evidence that the government uses benefit fraud to maximise the narrative around people who are cheating the system is the fact that they clump fraud and error together in the same reporting. So fraud and error is actually around 3.3%, fraud is 2.2%, but they put fraud and error together in order to bump up the numbers when they're talking about the amount of the benefits that are being cheated out of. Now, imagine if crime figures were murders and accidents together in order to instill fear in the crime levels that we have. This is exactly what we're doing with welfare spending. It's designed to make people in poverty look undeserving, and it's designed to keep you distracted from the real issues in public finance, which is not benefit fraud. Because there is a massive gap in terms of public finances that we are being cheated out of. It's called the tax gap. So the same way that benefit fraud is presented to us as a loss to the public purse, the tax gap is the amount of tax that we're not collecting for lots of different reasons, such as avoidance, evasion, underpayment, misreporting, that kind of thing. And HMRC's estimates are that we're currently missing around 5.3% of revenue through taxation through this tax gap. Now, tax revenue income dwarfs welfare spending, and this 5.3% tax gap is £46.8 billion a year. So it's more than double the rate of what we lose to benefit fraud, but about 8 times bigger in terms of the amount that we're losing. So where's the tax gap crackdown? Where are the front page headlines? Where will Rachel Reeves stand up tomorrow and talk about the massive gap in public finances created through the tax gap? No, but she will spend a disproportionate amount of time tomorrow talking about benefit fraud. Why? What's the point? Because they do not want us to look at wealth in the same way that we look at poverty. Because when we hear about welfare fraud, we don't necessarily think, gosh, that must be a really small minority spoiling it for the rest of us. It's not. The cognitive leap that we then make is that people claiming benefits are cheating us. They're cheats, benefit cheats, scumbags. It reduces empathy, it increases division, it increases suspicion, and it's basically saying people in poverty are cheating you. There's something untrustworthy about them. We shouldn't trust people who are claiming benefits. They're probably doing it, fraudulently, because otherwise, why would the government be cracking down on benefit fraud? It must be a massive problem. And And sadly, like many of these narratives, some people internalize this. And one of the biggest barriers for people to claiming the financial support that they're entitled to is shame and fear of the system and fear of being caught out and stigmatized by, or being labeled as a benefit cheat or a fraudster. The system is difficult to navigate as it is without the fear of being caught out for being a benefit cheat when you're actually not. So it serves multiple purposes. It continues and it reinforces the narrative that people on benefits are untrustworthy and, we ought to be suspicious because benefit fraud is a massive problem, 2.2%. But also it serves to put people off, for fear of a remarkably punitive system, which is very complicated and innocent mistakes can be clumped in with the rest of the fraudsters. So tomorrow, when we're listening to the budget and we're going, yes, go on, Rachel Reeves, this is a great idea. You must crack down on this benefit fraud. Think about it. Think about the narrative and think that's 2.2% of a system that is never going to be 100% fraud proof. No system is. But, think about it. Think, what narrative does this serve? Why do they want us to think this way about people living in poverty? We need to think more critically. We need better policy.